Hey guys, initially I wasn't planning on making this review, telling you about a mid-fi pair of IEMs by the name of Moondrop KATO, but after listening to them for about a week now and then comparing with some of its competitors, it was clear to me that this video needs to happen, it needs to go live. I wasn't expecting much out of them, so this is still a mid-fi IEM, it isn't that expensive. But they literally blew my mind on several occasions and I simply needed to share my thoughts with you, so here we go. When it comes to build quality, you are looking at a stainless steel IEM which was made using metal injection molding technique. Moondrop offers two body options. It's either a polished stainless steel that looks more like a mirror, or you can go with a scratch-resistant matte steel body that seems powder-coated, looking less impressive but ensuring a longer service life. KATO is borrowing design elements from its predecessor, KXXS. They have a medium-sized body, a standard-sized nozzle, and I personally like the finished product. Their detachable cable is one of the thickest that I've encountered with personal audio. It's quite beefy, but that didn't make it stiff. It's flexible enough, and rubbing against my clothing didn't add microphonics, strengthening the idea that it's a well-made cable in the first place. It uses high-purity copper wires that are silver-plated in a 4-core stranded geometry, and it uses gold-plated 2-pin connectors. As for tech inside it, KATO is a single-driver dynamic IEM based on the 3rd generation diamond-like carbon composite diaphragm. It's a composite driver, meaning that it uses different materials that have some unique acoustic properties. This is a highly rigid and extremely lightweight driver that improved the damping factor compared to its predecessor. KATO uses a custom 10mm driver that is being developed for about 2 years now. It includes a more efficient circuit as well as a larger acoustic cavity made out of brass. Moondrop offers two nozzle types, one made out of stainless steel and the other out of brass. I measured them both and I will leave some feedback at the later stages of this review, and until that happens, let's hit some eardrums. About 2 years ago I've tried their Starfield IEMs, which are going for something like $100, maybe a little bit more. And I was surprised by their build quality, which was very similar to the KATO, so also having a metal body. But I was more impressed by their sound tuning, so choosing really naturalness, so very easy to like, easygoing presentation. They had amazing measurements, and with KATO I'm getting a very similar vibe. They have, again, a very similar tuning, so choosing naturalness in a way. There is as much sub-bass definition as you can possibly want, so they can easily reach 20 Hz notes. They will impress bass addicts, no problem. There is weight, there is fullness in the mid-range, there is meat on the bone. Voices sounded really full, really weighty. And of course, treble goes way past top octave, so there is as much treble, again, as you can want. So I believe in terms of frequency response, they are covering it in full. And there is just one thing that is missing, and that is treble glare and listening fatigue, especially if I'm listening to them with the silicone spring tips. So long story short, these spring tips right here are pretty much the most comfortable tips that I tried in God knows how many years. I just find them super soft, so super easy to insert. They aren't rubbing against my ear canal. They are really soft, of course, very gentle on the ear. They aren't getting stiff outside. And long story short, these are pretty much the most comfortable tips, and most importantly, they sound better, more cohesive, more natural to memory foam ear tips that I've tried that I'm listening to for many years now. With spring tips, everything is really well arranged in the frequency response, so just covering it completely without any kind of rises, without drops in there. Sounds are just coming precisely at the same time, so in a very cohesive, natural way. Exactly how a top-grade IEM should perform. And in all honesty, I don't think there is a desktop headphone that could challenge this one in terms of technical performance or just subjective listening. There is little to complain about, except for a few things that will be revealed very soon. I'm not sure why Moondrop is offering a sensitivity of 123 dB per 1 volt of power, because usually IEM makers or headphone manufacturers are providing that number per 1 milliwatt of power. So realistically speaking, their sensitivity is actually at around 109, maybe 110 dB per 1 milliwatt of power. So of course that means you'll need a beefier sounding source, you'll need slightly more power on top, so you'll need a dedicated headphone amplifier, be it portable or not, for the best results, of course. Most of my IEMs were much easier to drive, and I even have free desktop headphones that need less power to achieve the same sound pressure level, so that was quite unusual, but understandable because a smaller driver will need to work much harder to achieve the same volume. So long story short, they sounded just okay, not really impressive out of a smartphone and laptop. I was almost maxed out, leaving little to no headroom at all. They sounded much better out of dedicated audio sources, so be them Bluetooth gizmos, USB dongles, portable DAC amps, portable audio players, desktop setups, all those really sounded amazing. Just make sure that your source is really noiseless and dead silent, because they can pick up residual noise from the downstream equipment. When it comes to transients, you should know me pretty well by now, so give me speed, give me some hard punches down low, and I'll be immediately impressed. So transient response is one of those things that are super important for me, because I could not listen to music if it puts me to sleep. And no matter how hard I've tried, so putting them on powerful portable units, on powerful desktop setups, I just couldn't make them mean, aggressive, or just hard punching with my electronica tracks. So I could listen to all that electronica all day long, so for hours and hours, but they just didn't send my earlobes flapping in the air like some high-end planars are doing. I believe that transient response is just okay, but not really impressive, so they don't have a need for speed, so to speak, so don't expect a lightning fast rendition of those bass notes. In my opinion, Kato are really outstanding sounding IEMs, so there are many good things to say about them, but transient response is really not one of them. It was just fine, sometimes even great, but it will not impress a transient nut as myself, and this is one of the less impressive things to say about them. As for Soundstage, while they cannot outperform the sheer scale, the openness of semi-open IEMs like FD5, FD7, which mind you are more expensive, they still sounded quite decompressed, quite airy, just never mixing together all those sounds and noises into a big blob of muddiness. So there is still some air in between the notes, and sounding a little bit bigger compared to their competition like Mesa Rise Solo, like Eco or H10. So please don't expect be just enveloped and wrapped by sounds. Don't expect them flying in all directions, because that cannot happen with drivers sitting just millimeters away from your eardrums. However, you can expect a decently sized soundstage that will be offering you an effortless and comfortable listening experience. I just finished listening to a live album, and Kato put me exactly where I wanted to be, in the front row, with the musicians playing only for me. And the whole experience felt really relaxed, very calm, very soothing. They fully convey the bodies of acoustic instruments, just providing longer decays and some gentle transients. In terms of detail retrieval, they will not impress you at first, but once you listen to more and more music, you'll start appreciating the way those micro nuances are being delivered to you. So they don't have very strong contours, very sharp leading edges, they don't have any of that, but everything just flows very easily, very naturally into your ears, and that is actually more important to me. Kato isn't really forcing all those details, and it will never highlight them, so if you want to listen to them, that's okay. If you don't want, that is also okay, so it never moves the spotlights on those micro nuances, on the micro scale. In absolute terms, Kato would not impress you in terms of detail retrieval, but it will impress you in the long run, so the way those details are being provided. So it doesn't focus on the outer shell of the musical notes, but more what's inside them, on what's more organic and lifelike sounding. Moving on to frequency response, regardless of ear tips that you'll be using, so be them memory foam or silicone tips. Kato can be described as having a perfect bass response, and that isn't really an exaggeration from my part. So forget about roll-offs in the sub bass, as everything starts really from 20 Hz. I'm into all kinds of electronica stuff, even underground music, and all those are combining beats with different musical instruments. And usually entry-level to mid-level IEMs can pose a problem with such music that is really crowded in a way, but that wasn't a problem at all with Kato, so they have really everything done really well. Kato really shined with bass-intensive music, so there is definition, there is cleanness, there is no distortion, so everything you want from that bass, that's a high-quality type of bass. Its mid-range was fuller sounding, it was warmer sounding, so slightly weightier compared to usual all armature or hybrid IEMs. It just infused a little bit more soul into my music. Voices were just to die for, and all my blues and acoustic collection just sounded outstanding. I cannot fault anything happening in here in the mid-range, so everything is just really nice, sounding natural and organic. They decayed slightly slower compared to all armature or hybrids, but I really like the way mid-range is being delivered with a dynamic driver. So in my opinion, they do mid-range really well. The treble performance is highly dependent on what ear tips you'll be using. So if you want slightly more extended treble, slightly more definition in there, if you want better contours, sharper leading edges, then go with the memory foam ear tips. And if you want slightly more organic treble, so without rising the most sensitive part of our hearing, so between 4 and 7 kHz, then go with the silicone ear tips. In my opinion, silicone ear tips worked better with everything actually, not only with rock and metal. So they just work better with the Kato, just providing a more even, more controlled frequency response. I've measured the performance using a mini DSP ear system, and probably the most important reading is the raw frequency response of its memory foam versus spring ear tips. What a huge difference! There is a huge rise in the 13 kHz region with memory foam ear tips that is nowhere to be found with the spring ear tips, and that is a very big deal in my opinion. Secondly, as you can see, there is a small difference between their stainless steel and brass nozzle. There is just a higher emphasis on the sub bass with brass nozzle, and everything else looks pretty much the same. For a much more technical and in-depth measurement analysis, please check my written review below that includes some additional graphs. Okay guys, if I'm overlooking their mediocre transient response, their average soundstage size, then Moondrop Kato is easily one of the nicest sounding and measuring IEM under $200. They sounded so cohesive and so right from the get-go that I don't see really the added value of much pricier IEMs. Well, there is indeed a single dynamic driver inside. It fully covered the frequency response, just putting to shame some pricier multi-driver IEMs. There is no need to compare the Kato with some other similarly priced IEMs like FIO FH3, like Mesa Rise Solo, like Eco OH10, because Kato will sound and measure better. Okay guys, my full in-depth review can be found on my website. In case you want to support this channel, please subscribe to it, and as usual, listen to my music, be positive, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!